My name is Elizabeth Thornton, and at 74 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of human greed imaginable. I was wrong when my husband Robert passed away last spring, leaving me our beautiful estate in Bend, Oregon. I never imagined that the people I trusted most would try to steal everything from under my nose using nothing but lies, forged documents, and my own grief against me. What started as a simple visit from my stepson turned into the most calculated betrayal I've ever witnessed. But here's what they didn't know. Robert and I had been preparing for this exact scenario for years. When they handed me those papers to sign, thinking they were about to rob a grieving old woman blind, I knew exactly what game they were playing. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand just how deep this betrayal went. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, or if someone has tried to take advantage of you during a vulnerable time, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, what my stepson did next will make your blood boil. But the revenge I served was ice cold and absolutely perfect. It was a Tuesday morning in October when David and his wife Monica arrived at Rosewood Manor unannounced. I was in my garden, tending to the roses that Robert and I had planted together over 30 years ago, when I heard their Mercedes crunch up our gravel driveway. The autumn air was crisp, and the Oregon mountains surrounding our property were painted in brilliant oranges and reds. "Hello, Elizabeth," David called out, his voice carrying that fake warmth he'd perfected over the years. At 48, he still had the entitled swagger of the spoiled child Robert had tried so hard to discipline. Monica clung to his arm, her designer heels clicking against the stone pathway. She was 35, blonde, and had calculating eyes. "David, Monica," I nodded, pulling off my gardening gloves. "This is unexpected." "We need to talk," David said seriously. "It's about Dad's estate. There are complications we need to sort out." I invited them inside, leading them through the grand foyer with its crystal chandelier. Robert had worked his entire life to build this place, starting with nothing and growing his engineering firm into the largest in 3 counties. We settled in the living room, where family portraits lined the mantel. David and Monica sat rigidly on the cream sofa, while I took my usual chair by the window. So I said, folding my hands in my lap, "What complications?" David pulled out a manila folder. "Well, Elizabeth, we've been going through Dad's papers with our attorney, and there's been an oversight with the estate planning. Some property transfers weren't properly executed before he passed." I raised an eyebrow. Robert and I had spent months with lawyers making sure every detail was perfect. "That's strange." Robert was very thorough. "Yes, well," Monica chimed in sweetly, "sometimes these legal matters are more complex than they appear. The good news is, we can fix everything today. We just need you to sign a few documents." She pulled out a thick stack of papers, setting them on the coffee table. The documents looked official, with legal letterhead and blue backing pages. "I should probably have my attorney review these first," I said carefully. David's jaw tightened. "Elizabeth, this is time sensitive. If we don't file these corrections with the county by Friday, the entire estate could end up in probate court. You wouldn't be able to access any of Dad's accounts." The fear in his voice sounded genuine, but I'd been married to a businessman for 34 years. I knew the difference between legitimate concern and manufactured panic. "What exactly do these papers do?" I asked, reaching for the documents. "They're just technical corrections," David said quickly. "Transfer deeds, beneficiary updates." Our lawyer explained it all, but the legal jargon is confusing. I flipped through the pages, noting the dense legal language and multiple signature lines. To most people, it would have looked like standard estate paperwork, but Robert had taught me to always read the fine print. Buried in paragraph 12 on page 6 was a clause transferring full ownership of Rosewood Manor to David Thornton. Page 9 made him sole executor of all remaining assets. Page 14 revoked my status as Robert's beneficiary entirely, claiming I had declined inheritance due to mental incapacity. They weren't just trying to steal from me, they were trying to declare me incompetent. I closed the folder and set it back on the table, my face carefully neutral. This is quite a lot to process. I'll need time to review everything, Elizabeth. Monica leaned forward sympathetically. I know this is overwhelming, but David is just trying to protect his father's legacy and make sure you're taken care of. These papers ensure you'll have access to the trust Robert set up for your care, the trust Robert set up for my care, as if I was some doddering old fool. I'd been running the financial side of Robert's business for 20 years, had a master's degree in accounting, and personally managed an investment portfolio worth millions. I understand your concern, I said, standing up, but I need to discuss this with my attorney first. David's mask slipped for just a moment, showing his irritation. Of course, Elizabeth, but remember the Friday deadline. After they left, I sat alone in the quiet house, the weight of their betrayal settling over me. Robert had been gone for 6 months, and David had never once asked how I was doing, never offered help, never even called. Now, suddenly, he was deeply concerned about my welfare. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed I was just another grieving widow, too overwhelmed to understand what I was signing. They had no idea that Robert and I had anticipated this exact scenario years ago. I walked to Robert's study and opened the wall safe that only I knew the combination to. Inside were the real estate documents, the ones that would turn David and Monica's greed into their worst nightmare. Robert had never trusted his son's motives. 5 years ago, we'd restructured everything, the house, the business, the investments, all placed in an irrevocable trust with me as sole beneficiary. David would inherit eventually, but only after my death, and only if he hadn't attempted to contest the will. Any attempt to defraud me would result in his immediate disinheritance, but that wasn't the beautiful part. 3 months before his death, Robert had prepared fake documents, papers that looked exactly like the ones David had just shown me. He'd given copies to David to test what his son would do. Now I knew. David had waited 6 months after his father's funeral, then arrived with forged documents designed to steal everything. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret. It's Elizabeth Thornton. Clear your schedule for tomorrow morning. It's time to spring our trap. Margaret Rodriguez had been our family attorney for 15 years and Robert's partner in setting up TH. David test. The next morning, I sat in her downtown Bend office, the fake documents spread across her desk like evidence in a criminal trial. They actually did it, Margaret said, shaking her head. Robert suspected David might try something like this, but I hoped we were being paranoid. Robert was never paranoid, I replied. He was thorough. Tell me about the surveillance. Margaret opened a file cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Confidential, Thornton Estate. Inside were photographs, bank records, and a private investigator's report. We've been monitoring David's finances since Robert's death. As requested, what we found is disturbing. She spread out documents like a prosecutor presenting a case, bank statements showing David's construction company was nearly bankrupt, credit reports revealing massive gambling debts, most damning, receipts for payments to a legal document forger in Portland, payments made 2 weeks ago. They've been planning this for months, Margaret continued. The documents they showed you aren't even the originals Robert prepared. They had them professionally forged. I studied a photograph of David meeting with a man outside a Portland office building. They really thought they could pull this off. Elizabeth, there's more. We've been monitoring their communications. They've already contacted Robert's business partners, claiming you're showing signs of dementia and they need to take over the company's contracts. My hands clenched. Robert's engineering firm had been his life's work, built into a respected company employing over 100 people. They've also been spreading rumors in town. Margaret added quietly, subtle suggestions that you're not handling Robert's death well, becoming forgetful. They're building a case for having you declared incompetent. There's more, Margaret said gently. We intercepted communications between David and a private care facility in Portland. He's already put down a deposit, telling them you'll be arriving within the month due to advancing cognitive decline. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of their betrayal. This wasn't just greed, it was complete erasure of my identity, my autonomy. They wanted to lock me away while they destroyed everything Robert and I had built. Show me the real documents, I said. Margaret unlocked her desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope marked for Elizabeth's eyes. Only inside was a letter, in Robert's familiar handwriting, along with legal documents that would have made David's blood run cold. My dearest Elizabeth, the letter began, if you're reading this, then David has shone his true colours. I pray I'm wrong, but I fear I'm not. The enclosed documents represent my final gift to you. Not just financial security, but the power to protect yourself and punish those who would prey on your grief. The documents were staggering. Robert had not only protected all our assets in an unbreakable trust, but prepared what amounted to a legal nuclear weapon if anyone attempted to defraud me. Pre-signed documents would transfer additional assets, properties and investments I hadn't known about into my complete control. More importantly, Robert had established a foundation in my name, funded with $3 million, dedicated to providing legal protection for elderly victims of financial abuse. He really thought of everything. I whispered, Robert loved you. Elizabeth, he knew that if anyone tried to take advantage of you, you'd be capable of fighting back. You just need the right tools. The plan was elegant. I would sign the forged documents, but not before making subtle modifications that would legally nullify them while appearing to give David everything. Meanwhile, Margaret would record everything, building an ironclad case for fraud and elder abuse. There's one more thing, Margaret said, pulling out a final document. Robert established a scholarship fund at Oregon State, specifically for women over 60 pursuing legal studies. Your story will inspire other women to protect themselves. When do we spring the trap? I asked. Margaret smiled. David called this morning. He wants to meet tomorrow at his office, with witnesses present. He's bringing his lawyer and a notary. He has no idea we'll be recording everything. I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in months. Then let's make sure David gets exactly what he deserves. Thursday morning arrived grey and drizzly. I dressed carefully, a simple black dress and pearls, designed to make me look every bit the grieving widow David expected. I even practiced looking slightly confused, the way someone might appear when faced with complicated legal documents. David's construction office was located in an industrial park, a modest building that belied the financial troubles Margaret had uncovered. His company trucks looked older and more worn, and several equipment bays stood empty. David greeted me with a performance embrace. Elizabeth, thank you for coming. I know this is difficult, but we'll get through this together. In the conference room, 3 people waited. Monica, a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Attorney Gerald Walsh, and a notary public. The setup was clearly designed to intimidate, official-looking people in an official-looking room, all focused on getting one confused widow to sign papers. Mrs. Thornton, Attorney Walsh began smoothly. What we're doing here is entirely routine. These are corrective documents to ensure your late husband's wishes are properly executed. I nodded, allowing my hands to tremble as I accepted the papers. I just want to do what Robert would have wanted, of course, David said, pulling out a chair with exaggerated concern. Dad would be grateful you're taking care of this. He always worried about leaving you with complicated legal matters. The patronizing tone made my skin crawl. But I maintained my performance. I slowly read through each page, occasionally looking up with confusion. This language is so complex. What exactly does this paragraph mean? Attorney Walsh pointed to a section transferring the house to David. This ensures the property remains in the family. Your husband wanted to make sure you'd always be taken care of. It was a masterful lie, technically true but completely misleading. The document created a trust with David as trustee and me as a dependent beneficiary with no control. And what about this section? I asked, pointing to the clause declaring me mentally incompetent. Monica jumped in with false concern. Oh, that's just legal language, Elizabeth. It protects you from having to make difficult decisions. David will handle all of that, so you can focus on your health. I looked around at these people who thought they were so clever. They had no idea every word was being recorded, or that their lawyer was about to become a key witness in their prosecution. I suppose that makes sense, I said slowly. Robert always handled the business side of things. This was perhaps the biggest lie I'd told all day. Robert had relied on my financial expertise throughout our marriage, often saying I was the brains behind his success. But David and Monica had never bothered to learn about my role, dismissing me as decorative. Exactly, David said, relief evident. Dad knew you'd want someone else to handle these complicated matters. I picked up the pen, letting it hover over the first signature line. Before I sign, I want to make sure I understand. These documents will ensure Robert's business continues successfully. Absolutely, Attorney Walsh confirmed. Mr. Thornton will personally oversee all operations. What he didn't know was that David's gambling debts and poor decisions had already cost the company several major contracts. Within months, he would have driven Robert's life work into bankruptcy, and I'll be able to continue living at Rosewood Manor for as long as you want, David assured me. Though you might find a smaller place easier to manage as you get older, we've looked at some lovely senior communities. There it was, the first hint of their real plan: get me to sign over control, then convince me to voluntarily move into the care facility they'd already selected. I signed the first document, then the second. With each signature, I could see David and Monica exchanging triumphant glances. Attorney Walsh maintained his professional demeanor, but I caught his satisfied smile when the last document was signed and notarized. David actually hugged me. Thank you, Elizabeth. Dad would be so proud. Yes, I said quietly. I think Robert would be very interested to see how everyone has handled this situation. As I drove away, I called Margaret. It's done. Do we have everything? More than enough, she replied with satisfaction. Attorney Walsh just became an accessory to attempted fraud, and we have it all on tape. Friday morning was the day David claimed we needed to file the estate corrections. It was also the day Robert had chosen for the revelation that would change everything. I woke before dawn, feeling anticipation and sadness that Robert wouldn't see his plan come to fruition. I dressed in my best black suit, not the confused widow outfit, but the professional attire of a woman who'd spent decades managing complex financial matters. Today, David would see the real Elizabeth Thornton. Margaret picked me up, her car loaded with document boxes representing months of preparation. We drove to the Bend County Courthouse, where a conference room had been reserved for what David believed would be a simple filing appointment. David arrived promptly, accompanied by Monica and Attorney Walsh. They all looked pleased, like people about to close a profitable deal. David even brought coffee and pastries, as if celebrating. Elizabeth, David said, embracing me with seeming warmth, I can't tell you how relieved I am that we got this sorted out. Dad would be so happy. Yes, I replied. I think Robert would be fascinated by today's proceedings. We settled around the conference table, with Margaret organizing her files. A court reporter documented everything officially, though David assumed this was standard procedure. Before we begin, Margaret announced, I need to inform everyone that Mrs. Thornton's legal team has uncovered irregularities in the documents signed yesterday that require immediate attention. David's face went pale, but Attorney Walsh maintained his composure. What kind of irregularities? Margaret opened her first file and spread out enlarged photocopies of the forged documents. These papers contain elements that don't match the original estate planning documents we have on file. More concerning, they appear to have been created using forged letterhead and fake legal language designed to mislead Mrs. Thornton. That's ridiculous, David sputtered. Those are the documents your office prepared. Actually, they're not, Margaret replied calmly. She opened another file, revealing communication records between David and the document forger. These records show the papers Mrs. Thornton signed were created by a professional forger using materials purchased by MR. David Thornton on October 15th. The silence was deafening. Attorney Walsh looked like he wanted to disappear, while Monica's face cycled through confusion, anger, and fear. David seemed frozen, unable to process that his plan was unraveling. Furthermore, Margaret continued, the financial investigation we conducted has revealed that Mr. Thornton has significant gambling debts and his construction company is facing bankruptcy. These facts were deliberately concealed while he attempted to gain control of the estate. She pulled out bank records, credit reports, and gambling receipts, spreading them across the table. David's financial desperation was laid bare: cash advances, second mortgages, loans from questionable sources. This is a misunderstanding, David said weakly. I was just trying to protect Dad's legacy by having your stepmother declared mentally incompetent. Margaret asked. She produced communications with the private care facility, including David's deposit and his claims about my advancing cognitive decline. Attorney Walsh found his voice. Mrs. Thornton, I had no idea about any of this. My client represented these documents as legitimate. Of course you didn't, I said, speaking directly for the first time. But you also didn't bother to verify their authenticity or question why a woman with a master's degree in accounting would suddenly be incapable of managing her affairs. But Margaret wasn't finished. Mrs. Thornton has asked me to reveal the full scope of her late husband's estate planning, which goes far beyond what Mrs. Thornton assumed. She began pulling out documents that made David's eyes grow wider with each revelation. Property deeds for commercial real estate in Portland and Eugene, investment portfolios worth millions, business partnerships that continued generating substantial income. The total value of the estate, Margaret announced, is approximately $38 million, not including ongoing business revenues and real estate appreciation. David looked struck by lightning. All his life he'd assumed his father was moderately successful, but nothing more. The idea that Robert had been quietly building a fortune of this magnitude had never occurred to him. Dad never told me. David whispered, your father didn't tell you because he was testing you, I said, finally allowing my anger to show. For 5 years. Robert watched to see what kind of man you'd become. He hoped you'd prove yourself worthy. Instead, you proved you'd steal from a grieving widow and have her locked away to get what you wanted. Mrs. Thornton, Attorney Walsh said carefully, what are your intentions regarding yesterday's documents? I looked at Margaret, who nodded. This was the moment Robert had planned for. The documents David had me sign are legally invalid due to their fraudulent nature, I announced. However, they do trigger certain provisions in my husband's will. That Mr. Thornton was unaware of, Margaret opened the final file, revealing Robert's real will, not the simplified version David had seen, but the complete document with all its conditions. Robert Thornton's will contained a specific clause regarding any attempt to defraud his widow. Margaret read aloud, "In the event of such an attempt, all inheritance provisions for the perpetrator are immediately and permanently revoked, and their share is donated to the Elizabeth Thornton Foundation for Elderly Legal Protection." David's face went grey. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, standing up, "that you've just donated your entire inheritance, roughly $12 million, to help other elderly women avoid the trap you tried to set for me." The devastation on David's face was complete. His scheme had failed, and his greed had cost him everything he stood to inherit legitimately. Robert's test had worked perfectly. "There's one more thing," Margaret added. "Mrs. Thornton has decided to press criminal charges for attempted fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The district attorney is very interested in this case." David looked around desperately, searching for some way to undo what he'd done, but there was no going back. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice breaking, "please, I'm family." I thought about all the times Robert had tried to teach David about integrity, about the difference between earning something and taking it. "Family," I said quietly, "doesn't try to steal from each other. Family doesn't lie about mental illness to justify theft, and family doesn't plan to have elderly relatives locked away so they can liquidate their assets." I gathered my purse and stood to leave. "Robert gave you every opportunity to prove yourself worthy of his legacy. David, you chose greed instead of integrity, theft instead of honest work. These aren't mistakes, they're character choices, and character has consequences." As I walked toward the door, I turned back. "The Elizabeth Thornton Foundation will help dozens of elderly women protect themselves from people exactly like you. Robert would be proud that even your betrayal serves a greater good." 6 months later, on what would have been Robert's 79th birthday, I stood in the garden at Rosewood Manor watching the roses we'd planted together bloom again. The morning Oregon air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine trees and possibility. The foundation was now helping dozens of elderly women each month, providing legal assistance and financial protection to victims of family fraud. The scholarship program had enabled 8 women over 60 to pursue legal education, giving them tools to protect themselves and others. David was serving a 10-year sentence for elder abuse and fraud. Monica had divorced him and disappeared to another state with their children. Attorney Walsh faced disciplinary action from the state bar, though his punishment was lighter due to his cooperation once he understood what had happened. But the most important outcome wasn't David's punishment, it was the knowledge that Robert's love and foresight had created something beautiful that would outlast both of us. I walked through the quiet house, turning off lights with the comfortable routine of someone who felt completely secure. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had tried to convince the world I was too confused to live independently, while his actions had proven I was more than capable of protecting myself and others. In Robert's study, I paused at his photograph on the desk. "We did it," I said quietly. "We protected everything that mattered, and we turned David's betrayal into something that helps other people." Tomorrow would bring new foundation cases, new opportunities to help vulnerable people protect themselves, new chances to prove that wisdom and integrity could triumph over greed. But tonight, I was content knowing that Robert's love had created something meaningful that would continue long after I was gone. David had seen me as an obstacle to be removed. Robert had seen me as a partner capable of carrying on his work. The difference between those perspectives was the difference between love and exploitation, between family and predation, between legacy and theft. In the end, that was Robert's greatest gift, not the money or property. But the knowledge that I was worthy of his trust, capable of his love, and strong enough to carry forward everything we'd built together, the test was over, love had won, justice had been served. And the legacy we'd created would continue to help others for generations to come. That's my story, how they tried to trick me into signing papers, and how I tricked them instead. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, or if someone has tried to take advantage of you during a vulnerable time, I'd love to hear about it. Please share your experience in the comments below. We will feature your story because every woman's voice deserves to be heard. Your story might be the encouragement another woman needs to stand up for herself. Remember, wisdom and strength don't diminish with age, they grow more powerful. With every challenge we survive,